Hi, welcome. I found again a new story, so enjoy it. When I first started writing this story, it was mostly about little things, creepy coincidences here and there, strange moments, but you later have to question for your own sanity. Brief hints that maybe we all live in some kind of matrix where glitches occasionally slip through. Nothing that couldn't be explained, especially when you consider how exhausted my mind was from constantly running on too little sleep. That's how I looked at it in the beginning. But after the night of November 20th, all of my skepticism collapsed. Sometimes I want to believe that everything that happened to me was just the result of sleep deprivation and vivid dreams, but that explanation has been getting harder and harder to believe. So, I'll start from the beginning. I think most people have heard the quote about people with insomnia being caught somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. When I first watched Fight Club, that seemingly ordinary line was the part that stuck with me the most. I've struggled with insomnia since I was young, but it became much worse after I transferred to another university and changed my major. A doctor told me it was probably stress related, and at the time I didn't question him. I wasn't getting along particularly well with the people around me. The workload at the new university was several times heavier than what I was used to, and the change in my surroundings probably played a part too. I could spend hours lying in bed after midnight, or wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning, knowing that there was no chance I'd manage to get those last few hours of sleep. My body felt like some enormous machine that kept running long after someone had flipped the switch. Even after being told to shut down, it would keep going out of sheer momentum until the last gear finally stopped turning. I'd had the same problem during the summer, but back then it was easy to deal with. I simply destroyed my sleep schedule completely. I had a part-time job with flexible hours, so I'd go to bed whenever I was too exhausted to stay awake and get up whenever I happened to wake up. Once I started having regular classes, that luxury disappeared. The dark circles under my eyes became my constant companions whenever I went to university. But even a broken biological clock has its limits, and eventually my body found a way to get the rest it needed. Against my wishes, I started sleeping twice a day. I'd get a few hours in the early morning before classes, which was nowhere near enough, and then another hour or two in the late afternoon, when exhaustion would simply overwhelm me. Of course, that second sleep ruined whatever chance I had of sleeping properly that night, and the cycle would begin all over again the next day. I tried more than once to stop taking those afternoon naps. It didn't matter. My bed seemed to turn into a magnet, pulling me toward it whenever I sat down for even a minute. I became completely helpless against the need to close my eyes, but that wasn't the worst part, because it was during those afternoon naps that I started having the dreams. They were incredibly realistic and unusually easy to remember, which apparently isn't uncommon when you're drifting in and out of sleep. But the dreams themselves were incredibly simple. At first, I didn't pay much attention to them. Even then though, there was this uncomfortable feeling buried somewhere in the back of my mind, like something was terribly wrong. I just couldn't figure out what, and the more that understanding seemed to slip away from me, the more anxious I became. In the first dream I remember clearly, I was simply walking around my city. It was already dusk, but the streetlights hadn't come on yet, leaving the streets covered in darkness. I think I was looking for something. I just didn't know what. There was no one around, even though I was walking through the city center, a place that was never completely empty, not even late at night. I just kept walking through the dark streets without knowing where I was going or why. You know how dreams sometimes work like that. You do something without ever questioning why you're doing it. It was exactly like that. When I woke up, I felt deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't exactly a scary dream, not yet. I had several dreams like that, with minor variations, different streets, different roads, but the unsettling emptiness was always there. What surprised me most was how accurately I remembered the places. Dreams usually don't work that way. You can be standing on your own street 1 second, then suddenly find yourself somewhere in Germany, and a moment later you're on another planet. But not these dreams. I could remember every turn and every street. Everything was real. The city was laid out exactly as it was in real life, as if I were walking through my own memories instead of dreaming. But that was only the beginning. A couple of those dreams were enough to genuinely scare me. In one of them, I walked into a store, apparently looking for something to buy. I waited at the register for a long time before realizing there was no cashier. When I noticed the store was completely abandoned and looked as if it had been left in a hurry, I started looking for whoever was supposed to be working there. That's when I heard someone crying somewhere in the back. I followed the sound and found a restroom with one locked stall. The crying was coming from inside. Once I realized someone was in there, I started knocking. The person began crying even harder. When they spoke, "Please, leave. I've seen you before. I can't do this again." The words didn't mean anything to me. For some reason, I started pulling on the door handle. It wouldn't open, so I pulled harder. The crying turned into screaming, mixed with words I couldn't understand. I think the person inside was praying. I kept trying to force the door open until eventually the lock gave way. The door started to swing inward. A scream of pure terror came from inside, and the dream ended. In another dream, something similar happened. I walked into an apartment building and noticed that one of the doors on the floor was slightly open. Out of curiosity, I stepped inside. I found myself in someone's apartment. It looked completely normal. I walked around for a while before casually sitting down on the couch. When a young woman in a bathrobe walked out of the bathroom, she saw me and immediately started screaming. A long, terrified scream. I stood up and walked toward her as if I were actually happy to see her, completely ignoring the fact that she was screaming at the top of her lungs. When a garbage truck outside my window woke me up, I admit that one bothered me. Unfortunately, I didn't really have any close friends in the new city that I could talk to about things like this. Well, except for Vadim. I'd met him at my previous university, but he was a serious guy, and I didn't want to bother him with what sounded like complete nonsense. So I started looking online to see what dreams like these could mean. I even read a couple of pages from some old dream dictionary. The universal answer was stress, maybe some buried aggression caused by everything I'd been going through. That would explain why I kept wanting to break down doors or silent women who screamed whenever they saw me. At one point, I even laughed at myself. Apparently, in my dreams, I was such an unpleasant looking person that everyone either ran away from me or begged me not to come any closer, all because they couldn't stand looking at my face. That joke stopped being funny after the next dream. I am here. Open the door. That's what I tried to say at the beginning of that dream, while standing outside my classmate Diana's apartment. According to the dream, Diana, the class representative for our group, was hosting a birthday party for someone we both knew. Like me, she rented an apartment and shared it with a friend, a student from another class. I'd actually learned that in real life by accident after overhearing Diana talking about it with some friends between classes. We didn't know each other nearly well enough for her to invite me to anything like that, but of course, that thought never crossed my mind in the dream. There was no answer from inside. That was fine. I tried the handle and realized the door wasn't locked, so I opened it myself. I stepped into a hallway that presumably my imagination had created from scratch. Diana was in the kitchen. Her roommate, a tall blonde girl, was setting the table in the living room. Apparently, I was the first guest to arrive. I decided not to wait around and walked into the living room. I think I waved at the blonde. Although I never actually saw my own hand, she looked up and suddenly froze. She took a step backward and began trembling as if she were freezing cold. What's wrong? I tried to ask, but the words caught in my throat and came out as nothing more than a weak rasp. Footsteps coming from the kitchen. Fast. Getting closer. A moment later, Diana walked into the room. I could almost feel her staring at my back. When I turned around, she dropped the bowl she was holding. Then she screamed. A horrible, piercing scream. Tears appeared in her eyes. She pointed at me and started shouting something about my face. I couldn't understand a single word, but whatever she'd said scared me enough that I immediately ran to the bathroom to look in the mirror. The moment I opened the door, the dream ended. What happened to my face? The words were still on my lips when I woke up. I jumped out of bed and immediately started touching my face. When I turned on the front-facing camera on my phone, I let out a breath of relief. It was the same pale, thin face I'd always had, complete with the dark circles under my eyes. Nothing had changed. I probably would have forgotten about the gym if it weren't for one thing. The next day, I was talking to Diana about classes. At some point, I casually mentioned that I hadn't been sleeping well. She suddenly told me that she and her roommate had both had nightmares the night before. They couldn't remember what they were about. Another strange coincidence. A religious person might have seen it as a sign. Someone into the paranormal might have blamed astral projection. I saw only one obvious explanation. I desperately needed some rest. Thankfully, the weekend was coming up, so I had a few days without early classes. The break was pleasant and badly needed, but once it was over, the cycle started again, and so did the dreams. I didn't nap every day. Sometimes something would keep me busy. Sometimes I'd actually manage to fight the exhaustion, but the strange dreams started becoming more frequent. Eventually, they weren't limited to afternoon naps. They began appearing in the middle of the night or just before morning, and their content became worse. In the next dream, I was trapped inside a dark, locked bathroom. I was screaming at Diana and her roommate to let me out, I was angry, furious. I cursed at them and kicked the door so violently that after waking up, I actually felt like I owed them an apology. On the other side of the door, I could hear two women having a tense conversation. They were arguing about something, almost as if they had forgotten I was there. Meanwhile, I kept throwing myself against the door like a trapped animal. Eventually, I gave up. I sat down in the corner, closed my eyes, and woke up. Not long after that dream, I ran into Diana at university. We were walking to class while discussing some schoolwork, and eventually the conversation became more casual. I wanted to ask her about the dreams. Something inside me desperately wanted to know what she'd seen, but another part of me knew I didn't want the answer. Unfortunately, she brought it up herself. "Did you get any rest before the test?" she asked. "Because we didn't. More weird nightmares." Then she smiled tiredly. "I think you're starting to have a bad influence on us. What are you talking about? How am I involved?" She laughed. "It was such a strange dream. I barely remember it, but I think I could hear your voice." She paused. "You were really angry. You were yelling at us for no reason, even though we hadn't done anything to you." I felt something inside me go cold. "Sorry, what did you say?" "You were angry. You kept hitting something too." She smiled again. "Don't worry, I'm not offended. Just don't do it again." She was joking. I wasn't. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Part of me wanted to ask whether she'd seen anything strange about my face. I forced the thought out of my mind. When the silence became awkward, I made some stupid joke and pretended everything was fine. At the time, I still considered it another coincidence. Maybe I'd talked about my dream somewhere, and Diana had overheard me. Maybe we'd both seen something similar during class that had somehow influenced our dreams. It was unlikely, but what else could I do except hold on to the idea that there had to be a logical explanation? "Good luck on the test," I said when we reached the classroom. We never talked about it again. After that, I had a few more dreams involving strangers. Once, I briefly saw another classmate I barely knew, but for a while, the disturbing coincidences stopped. Unfortunately, not for long, because now we get to the events that made it impossible to keep believing in coincidence, or, for that matter, my own sanity. This is where the dreams involving Vadim began. Vadim had been my classmate at my previous university. We stayed in touch even after I transferred. We liked the same games, the same jokes, the same YouTubers. We clicked almost immediately. We didn't see each other very often, but in the new city, he was probably the only person I still had regular contact with. Before November, I'd only seen him in my dreams a couple of times, always somewhere in the distance, never clearly enough to know for certain that it was actually him. There was nothing strange about those dreams. There were 4 dreams involving Vadim, and in the first one, I didn't even see him directly. I was standing outside his apartment building at night. His apartment was lit up, and I could see silhouettes moving behind the windows. The street was completely dark, making the figures easy to see. I just stood there, staring, waiting for something. I couldn't make out any details, but somehow I knew Vadim was inside when I heard the entrance door open behind me, and I ran. In the second dream, I was sitting on Vadim's couch. I could hear people talking in another room. In reality, I'd only seen that room in photographs, yet in the dream, I could see his entire apartment in perfect detail. Every piece of the furniture, every hallway, every little detail. Why was I just sitting there while someone was in the other room? It felt like I was waiting for my turn. Eventually, the conversation ended. I immediately stood up and walked into the hallway. Vadim came out of the bedroom and walked toward the kitchen without noticing me. I followed him, quietly, carefully. By that point, I was already uncomfortable. The dreams about Diana were still fresh in my mind, and I was so nervous that I couldn't fall asleep for a long time afterward. Eventually, I contacted Vadim and casually asked him whether he'd been having strange dreams. He told me he didn't really remember dreaming at all. Of course he didn't. He hadn't seen me in the dream. At least, that was what I told myself. I pushed the thought away and hoped things would turn out the same way they had with Diana. They didn't. When exhaustion finally overwhelmed me, despite coffee and energy drinks I'd been using to stay awake, I had another dream about Vadim. And naturally, this time we were in his kitchen. There was running water behind me, the sound of dishes clinking together. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to pick up a glass, but I couldn't. Every time I reached for it, my hand simply seemed to pass through. I couldn't even see my hand properly. I glanced at Vadim. He was standing with his back to me. For some reason, I started talking to him. The conversation made absolutely no sense, but I remember every word. I could really use some tea with honey. The tea was already sitting in front of me. The bees took the honey. Wait until the towel dries. Maybe we'll go get it back. I don't have a car. I run everywhere. So do I. And I'm fast. He paused. But I've got it worse. They're watching me. He still didn't turn around. They're always watching me. My bones hurt because of it. And they're going to keep hurting. I don't know why I said that. I chose this. The others weren't right for me. This place is comfortable. I smiled. It'll be like this everywhere now, on the pavement, behind balconies. Eyes everywhere, even without the bees. Vadim suddenly went silent. I turned toward him. I think I smiled. He grabbed the plate in front of him and looked at me with absolute terror. Who are you? His voice was barely more than a whisper. Who are you? I didn't understand. I wanted to tell him my name. I wanted to explain. But once again, the words wouldn't come out. Vadim kept mumbling like he was delirious. Then he slowly collapsed to the floor, and the dream ended. I woke up drenched in sweat. My whole body was shaking. I couldn't even understand why. Something about that dream had felt fundamentally wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling for the rest of the day. After that, there was another break, almost a week, and during that time, I noticed something strange. Vadim seemed to be avoiding me. We'd planned to spend Friday night playing games together, but he suddenly said he was busy. When I suggested another day, he stopped responding. I sent him a few memes. Nothing. Before that, he'd always at least reacted with an emoji. When I finally asked if everything was okay, he simply told me he was tired and that we'd talk later. I believed him. I wish I hadn't, because that night I had the next dream. It began suddenly. I was running down the street. A small figure was moving ahead of me, getting farther away. I ran faster. The wind rushed past my ears. My legs didn't seem to get tired. My heart was pounding, and I was filled with a strange excitement. I wasn't running away from something. I was chasing it. I was the hunter, and I wanted to catch whatever was ahead of me more than anything. We left the street and cut through a courtyard. The figure tried to escape, but it was clearly exhausted. It was weaker than me, slower. Eventually it turned around, and I stopped for a moment. It was Vadim, the same terrified eyes I'd seen in the kitchen. Only now there was something else in them. Desperation. Vadim, what are you? I stopped. Instead, I rushed toward him with both arms outstretched. That's when I saw them. Or rather, what was supposed to be my hands. They weren't hands. They were long, twisted appendages. Too many joints. Too many fingers. They moved together with unnatural precision. They reached for Vadim. He tried to crawl away. He begged. But the things wrapped around him before he could get far. His scream was cut short. I can't describe exactly what happened next. Part of me wants to believe I simply didn't see it, or that my mind refused to remember. But every time I close my eyes, I can still picture Vadim staring at me in terror, while those twisted shapes closed around him. And when I ran from Vadim, from what I'd seen, from everything. The fear was so overwhelming that something inside me finally snapped into awareness. I realized I was dreaming. I knew I was asleep, but I couldn't wake up. It felt as though some instinct was controlling my body. I had to get away from that place, so I ran toward my apartment. Even in the dream, I knew the way home perfectly. Help! I tried to scream, but only a hoarse whisper came out. Eventually I reached the entrance to my building. I pulled on the door for what felt like a full minute. It wouldn't open. There were too many locks, so I decided to climb through my own window. I just wanted to get somewhere safe, somewhere familiar, somewhere I could lie down and forget everything that had happened. Strangely enough, climbing through the window was incredibly easy. I landed in the living room and immediately ran toward my bedroom. When I stopped, someone was lying on my bed. It was me. Everything in the room was exactly as I'd left it. The clothes I'd fallen asleep in. My laptop still running on the desk because I'd forgotten to shut it down. Even the position of the body was exactly how I had fallen asleep, on my back, phone still in my hand. I'd fallen asleep, scrolling through the news. I understood what I was looking at almost immediately, but then another thought occurred to me. If I was looking at myself, then who was I? I woke up, and honestly, that was the worst moment of my life. When I opened my eyes, I didn't immediately understand where I was. My mind was slow, heavy, disoriented. But when I realized I was staring at the open door to my bedroom, and something was standing in the doorway. For a second, all I could see was a dark shape. When it became clearer, the thing was surrounded by a strange haze. Its body was thin and vaguely human, but it seemed to be made almost entirely out of long, twisting appendages. They clicked and shifted against one another as it moved. At first, it looked like a person. When I realized that wasn't its real shape, those things could rearrange themselves. They could make it look like almost anything. And its face, I don't know if I can even call it a face. I can't properly describe what I saw. All I know is that I was staring into countless eyes, and for one brief moment I felt relieved when the haze around it became thicker and started hiding its features. When it spoke, I, here, open. The face, what's wrong? Run, far, Vadim, I screamed. At that moment, I still hoped I'd wake up again, but maybe this was just a nightmare inside another nightmare, terrifying, but still only a dream. But I didn't wake up. The thing disappeared from my sight almost instantly. Yet I knew what I'd just seen. There was no explanation for it. Somehow, sleep and reality had switched places. I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began, where I was, where it was, or whose eyes I was looking through. I kept screaming until my neighbors decided someone was being murdered and called the police. What followed was a long conversation with the officers and my landlord. Eventually, they strongly recommended that I get a psychiatric evaluation. Of course, I didn't tell them everything. If I had, they probably would have taken me somewhere immediately. Instead, I gave them the simplest version of the story. A student, under extreme stress, severely sleep deprived, starting to lose his grip on reality. What about Vadim? I asked them that in the middle of everything. What happened to Vadim? Nobody paid much attention. They didn't know who I was talking about, so I had to ask him myself. I messaged him as soon as I could. No response. Not the day, not the next, not the day after that. Eventually, his sister contacted me. She told me about the funeral. Vadim had died the night I woke up screaming. A heart attack. Apparently, he'd always had a weak heart. It was bad enough that he'd even been exempted from military service. His death devastated his family, but just like everything else, they found a logical explanation for it. His heart simply gave out. That's what they believe. But I know the truth. Vadim didn't die on his own. I killed him. Or rather, something used my exhausted, sleep-deprived mind to reach him. Something that had somehow learned to move through my dreams. Something that had been using me to enter the homes of people I knew. Looking for someone. Looking for victims. I know how insane that sounds. That's why I'll never tell anyone. But there is one more thing I haven't told you. When we went to Vadim's apartment for the wake, I suddenly dropped to my knees and started crying. His family thought it was grief, and in a way they were right. But there was another reason. I recognized the apartment. It was exactly the same as it had been in my dreams. The furniture, the hallway, even the kitchen utensils were in the same places. But I'd never been inside that apartment. I'd only ever seen photographs of the living room. That's it. Put a like, leave a comment, give me a feedback. Bye.